circumstance, what is going to work best for your family, to express both positive feedback and also your concerns. I do read every email that I receive, and so I appreciate everyone for taking the time to help us continue to improve how we're transitioning from this moment in terms of reopening. I also just want to share a little bit about how we're thinking about the fall. And it is our intent to begin the fall with in-person instruction. We're cautiously optimistic in terms of the increases of the vaccine distribution, of the supply, of what we're seeing in terms of cases. And so in our planning, we are hopeful to be able to provide a more robust in-person instruction for the fall. And we aren't thinking of beginning the year in virtual learning. Now, with that said, the one thing we have learned about this pandemic is the nature of unpredictability. And so while that is in our planning, we do know we do need to plan for in case we need to quarantine, which means we need to continue to build on our foundation around virtual learning. And we need to plan for any changes that we may, hopefully not, but that we may encounter next year. So we are continuing to plan with multiple streams, but I do want to communicate firmly that that is our intent, given what we're seeing, that we want to begin the year with in-person learning. So again, thank you all for joining tonight. And with that being said, I will pass it over to Board President Gonzalez for a few welcoming remarks before we hand it over to staff.
Thank you, Superintendent. Welcome, everyone. My name is Shanti Gonzalez. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm board president and also the District 6 representative. It's good to see everyone. See some of you, and looking forward to hearing your questions. Just wanted to share a little bit about what we're doing tonight. We're going to be talking about the plans for the spring. And so I know many of you, we've been getting lots of emails. Many of you are really focused on the fall and what the fall program is going to look like. We're not there yet. So tonight we're talking about the spring instruction, and also some of the sample schedules we're going to share with you all. And then tonight, just to be really clear that your specific school sites will be providing specific information. The schedules are going to look a little bit different at the secondary level, as well as things like returning to school and welcoming procedures and all those kinds of things are going to be shared with specific school communities. And yeah, we're not talking about the fall yet. I know folks are really wanting to know more about that, but we're still in bargaining with our unions about that, as well as, we're still figuring out what the variants are going to look like, what the vaccine availability is going to be this summer and things like that. So with that, I'm going to allow my colleagues, the Vice President Sam Davis from District 1 and Director Thompson from District 7, if they're available, to just say hi, and then we're going to move into our program for this evening. Do feel free to continue putting your questions in the Q&A. I know staff are answering them as quickly as they can. And yeah, with that, I'll turn it over to you, Vice President Davis.
Thank you, President Gonzalez, and welcome everybody. My name is Sam Davis. I'm the director for District 1, Vice President of the board, and I do appreciate everyone taking the time to participate. We are really glad we're able to offer some very limited in-person instruction this spring. And as the superintendent said, for the fall, we're optimistic about being able to achieve 100% in-person instruction. The situation of the pandemic has been improving in ways that were hard to imagine just a few weeks ago. The infection rate for Alameda County is the lowest that it's been since last summer. Over a quarter of all residents of Alameda County have been vaccinated, and Alameda County is very likely to be in the orange tier as of the 31st. So it's crucial that we all work together to maintain that progress. We need to follow the safety guidelines, keep our masks on. As many people as possible should get vaccinated as soon as you qualify. So we need to follow those guidelines both in schools and in our daily lives so that we don't suffer another surge in our community. We can't give up the progress that we've made. But yeah, it's really exciting to see the progress that we are making, and I'm very hopeful for the future. So thank you for the time to speak. And I'll pass it on to Director Thompson.
I don't see Director Thompson. So maybe he can close us out. Why don't we keep moving, Ms. Talkington?
Okay, thank you both. So for this evening's meeting, just want to give you an overview of what we're going to share for information and how when you'll be able to ask questions and share comments. We're going to start the evening by sharing the schedules for in-person learning at a high level. Your specific school site schedules will be shared with you from your school site, and then we'll pause for Q&A. And then the second portion of our info session will be dedicated to our safety procedures that we have in place for the in-person instruction that we'll be moving into. And then we'll pause again after that portion of the agenda. So with that, I am going to pass to our Chief Academic Officer, Sandra Aguilera.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I do have some colleagues that are here to help with the discussion, especially during the Q&A. Just wanting to mention that there are other people that are going to be joining in this conversation this evening. Next slide, please. So as we go through the phases, we want to just reiterate where we are in our phase implementation. So phase 1 has been full distance learning. Phase 2, we began to open some in-person hubs in October. And now we're embarking on phase 3, which is beginning the in-person hybrid instruction. And hybrid instruction is both a combination of distance learning and in-person in the classroom learning. And so that is where we are at. To give us an update as to where we are with the tentative agreement, Janine Lindsay is here this evening to take us through that. And then after, Tara Gard will take us through a staffing update. So I'll hand it over to Janine for those updates.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining today. So we have, as you've heard, have a agreement with OEA now, our teachers union, which was ratified over the weekend. And so we're entering this phase 3.1, which references phase 1 of the OEATA, which is an optional period. And we know that this was a compromise for us to allow for some teachers to opt in as a first phase. It's just 2 weeks, the week before spring break and the week after, but then all teachers return on April 14th, and that's when we enter phase 2. We are in negotiations with our other bargaining units. Just so you know, we have 7 unions in OUSD, and we've reached tentative agreements with them as well. And so we're excited about the launch, and we have our partners, our labor partners with us as we embark upon this. So I'll turn it over to Tara to talk more about where we are with phase 3.1 and the opt-in. Tara?
Sure. Hello, I'm Tara Gard, Chief Talent Officer in Oakland, and thank you for being here. I'd like to first talk to you about the opt-in period. So the tentative agreement was approved on Saturday. So we were able to notify all of our OEA members, over 2,000 OEA members, to complete either an opt-in or an opt-out notification to our office so that we know who is opting in to be in person on the 25th. It is a voluntary opt-in process. And that closed on Monday at the end of the day. So we reached an opt-in of about 38% of our OEA members that will be coming to support on the 25th. And then I believe Janine will talk again about the 14th, but I will mention now that the other piece with the mandatory return on the 14th, we did have 92% of our OEA members coming back on that 14th, and then the other that just may need a reasonable accommodation or other supports during that time. So we are focused right now on how to support schools with their staffing for that 25th date. Yeah, again, it was 38% of OEA members who opted in. However, we're working with schools closely. We do have SIP subs that are also OEA members, but that may be supporting at schools. So we're also working with school sites on providing additional supports throughout. It will be, again, that voluntary period. Principals are working closely with our team to make sure that we can support schools as best as we can through that process. And so I'm going to pass it back to Janine to talk about the mandatory period.
Thank you, Tara. So as you can see, we will have our teachers back in full effect, 92% of them on April 14th to start the hybrid model process. And you'll see those schedules just in a moment. Many of you have already seen them. And we do know that this will be a transition period for our all of our staff, having been in distance learning throughout the year. But there's a lot of energy around it from all of our labor groups, SEIU, AFSCME, UAOS representing our principals, and Teamsters who have been delivering food throughout the year, and our buildings and trades group throughout the year. And next slide.
Janine, I'd also, before we go to that last slide, I do want to say that parents will hear from their principals about the staffing at their sites by Thursday, so that they know. You will hear from your principals by Thursday about how that's looking.
Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? So as we go into after the staffing, we have been in the process of developing the hybrid schedules. And I wanted to give just a little bit of background of how these hybrid schedules were developed. We have a committee that has been working to provide some insight as to what would work best in our school communities. We have had some input from a national bank of different schedules that our school districts around the country and even in different parts of the world have been implementing. So we have looked at various models and narrowed in on 6, and then continued to narrow and discuss with our principals the best model. What you will see in the guidance is considerations that we thought about as we were designing. So a major area was space. And this work that happened more closely in the spring actually was a continuation of what happened in the summer. And there was guidance that was developed around how many students in each of our classrooms would fit given the current CDC guidance. We know that that is being adjusted. We know that there's a discussion about the 3 feet versus the 6 feet. And we are still working through that. We're closer to 4 to 6 feet in that discussion. But we developed a dashboard that took into consideration the square footage of every single classroom in our district and labeled how many students would fit into that particular classroom. So we know our space constraints. Tara just went through the staffing, and we know right now we're in the voluntary phase and we'll move into the mandatory phase. But we do have to consider what are the best models that we can implement given our staffing situation. And then of course, students, and many of you have been responding to the student intent to return form, which tells us if you're intending to be in person when we do hybrid instruction, or if you're planning to stay in distance learning. It's very interesting. You saw a report that we released, I believe it was now almost 2 weeks ago, of the results. and about half of our students are choosing to remain in distance learning. So it was really important, and this came up a lot in the considerations in our discussion, that we maintain a current distance schedule. That would be important, and that we wouldn't limit the amount of in-person instruction, but we would want to maintain that consistency. So space, staff, students were all a part of the process to develop the hybrid schedule. Now, I'll take us into the next slide, which is the hybrid schedules. We released these on Saturday. You can refer back to that email, and also when this this deck goes out to the community, you'll be able to click on the different schedules. You'll notice just how complex our entire school system is, because we do have different programs, and we couldn't just set one schedule for the entire district, because we do have different time considerations for those different grade spans. So we do have a preschool schedule for the general education part day. We have a preschool schedule for a full day, which is both general education and special education. We have an elementary hybrid schedule, an elementary special day class schedule, a secondary hybrid schedule, a secondary special education SPC schedule. We also have a young adult program, which serves our special education students that are from 18 to 22 years old. That is included. And adult education will start on April 19th. We are still in the process of developing those schedules. I want to reiterate that we, as we set schedules, we do continue to negotiate the impact that OEA identifies through implementation of these schedules. So I'm going to take us through 2 specific schedules, and we'll answer Q&A after we go through those schedules. So next slide is the elementary schedule. So you can see where we're trying to remain consistent in the instructional program to offer synchronous instruction through Zoom from the 9 to 11:30 block. And then from the 11:30 block to 12:30, that would be the transition time for Group A and Group B going to campus. Now, the model that we landed on was the AABB plus, of course, C, which is the continual distance learning model. And on Mondays and Tuesdays, we have identified the afternoon, 12:30 to 3 o'clock block, as being the in-person time for Group A. And then Wednesday would be a synchronous day in the morning, and then the afternoon, we would remain an asynchronous, so the usual Wednesday schedule. And then Thursday and Friday would be in-person instruction from 12:30 to 3 for Group B. So if you are choosing an in-person option, you would be on campus in the afternoon twice a week for in-person instruction. So that is the details for, those are the details for the elementary hybrid schedule. Now, we did, all of our school sites were provided this schedule. There are probably, here and there a little bit of staggering for the start times, but generally this is what we have, for our schools in terms of expectations for providing in-person instruction. But of course, a school site may vary by 5 to 10 minutes. And that's why you will receive more definitive schedules from your principal if you have not already. Next slide, please, is the secondary slide. Okay, so for secondary, we're talking about spring. I'll talk about the quarter system towards the end of the spring schedule. So again, we have identified our Monday and Tuesday schedule. Now, for the first part of the opening, it's important to understand priority groups. And we have labeled our priority groups as being students that, sorry, I have there we go. Students that are at risk for abuse, neglect, or exploitation. This is the language from SB 86. Students that are attending below 60% of the week. English language learners, unhoused students, homeless students, foster youth students, students without secure technology and internet access, students who are in an SEC class who spend more than 50% of their day in a self-contained setting. So those are the students that we consider to be priority students. And those students are the target group for the secondary schedule. Plus, under SC 86, we had to identify one grade level for inclusion in the in-person opportunity. And we recommended and landed on 6th grade as being that grade for priority students. So what you see in the green, the light green shaded areas are the in-person opportunities for students. Now you're still labeled or grouped into the groups A and B. So that is still an option, but you would get an assignment if you opted in for in-person. You would be assigned to either a group A or a group B. And it would work as an advisory schedule. And that is the focus for those opportunities for in-person instruction. So again, offered to 6th grade and students that were through that list that I just named, listed for priority for 7th through 12th grade. The current distance learning schedule would remain intact, just as we discussed for the elementary level. We saw that as being least disruptive to maintaining that schedule, because many people have already gotten into the rhythm of that morning synchronous time. The schedules will vary based on the current distance learning schedules at each site. So there may be some variation there. And of course, school sites, again, will communicate with their families the specific schedule, but this is what we're expecting more or less for our secondary students. Now, not part of this discussion right now immediately is the discussion about fall. I've received emails, some of our network superintendents in the high school level have received communication as well. Our superintendent has shared the emails that have come from parents. And we know that the discussion around the quarter system is of concern for families. And what we're going to do is offer an opportunity for families to meet with us in a slightly smaller setting to hear the concerns. It'll be open to the public, of course, but we would have just a specific discussion on the concerns around the quarter system. We know that the way it was implemented this year didn't work for all families. There's especially concern around the advanced placements of the AP courses, certain math courses, and our world language courses not being all throughout the year. And so I'll commit to everyone here this evening to share in about a week's time a open meeting where families can come in and explain the concerns. And then we would turn around with hearing your concerns to consider what was raised during that session with you. So just wanting to acknowledge that we've heard from families that the quarter system didn't work for all students. We're open to the discussion and refining that. That way we make improvements into next year. And I'll be messaging out when we can get together as a smaller group that's interested in the quarter system. So with that, here today, and I should have said this earlier, I apologize. Monica Thomas is an elementary network superintendent. She, along with a couple of principals, really led the design for the elementary schedule, elementary hybrid schedule, and Nicole Knight, along with network superintendents and for middle school and high school, and some principals that led the development of the secondary schedule. So we're all here to answer Q&A, and I'll hand it to Jody so that way we can have more of the discussion, but we're here to answer and listen to the feedback from the community.
Great, thank you, Sandra. So we, as you've seen, a lot of the questions have been answered in the Q&A, and hopefully you can see all the responses. And I'm going to pull out some of the common questions that I see in the Q&A. And also at this point, you can raise your hand. I do see about 7 folks who have raised their hand, so we will take some live questions as well. We're going to pause for a Q&A section for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to finish with the second portion of our meeting, which is about the safety guidelines. So a couple questions to start, and then I will go to the raised hands. First, there is several questions about referencing the recent change in guidance from the state about 6 feet distancing to 3 feet distancing. And so just wondering how the district is planning to adjust to that new guidance that came out, and if that potentially means increased cohort size at some point. So if somebody could give a response to the question.
So currently we are using the 4 to 6 feet that we have received from Alameda County. I do understand that that is possibly being updated, and I think that in the next section for our safety considerations, that can be cleared up with Salja's help, because she has her finger on the pulse when it comes to all of the safety concerns. But as of right now, we have still been using the 4 to 6 measurements until we're directed from Alameda Public Health to adjust. So Salja, I don't know if you have more to add right now, if you want to take that into the next safety section.
Can you hear me? I will address that in the safety section.
Okay, great. So some questions about what is happening, maybe if I can group a few together. So if you could speak to what will happen with any extracurriculars that students will be receiving, how that plays into the sample schedule. And then the students who opt into in-person instruction, what will they be receiving any different instruction that those who stay in remote will not be getting? Obviously they won't be in person, but if you can explain what the students will be receiving in remote at the time that those who choose in person.
In terms of the extracurricular activities, we have been discussing this as like if they're coming in person and then also are opting into in-person extracurricular activities, there is a limit to the number of cohorts that students can participate in. The limit is 2 cohorts. So we are, mindful of that. We've also had discussions around once you start in a cohort, you can't really intermix cohorts. And that's why we've developed the schedule the way that we have. So students can participate in up to 2 cohorts if in person. And that is for our school sites to help manage and make sure that students aren't in multiple cohorts. So it is definitely going to be a site-by-site discussion and tracking students specifically. But 1 cohort is considered if you're in-person instruction. And so you would do that schedule as indicated in the rotation. And then you could participate in an extracurricular activity as long as you are maxing with 2 cohorts that you're mixing with. So that's the first part. And Jody, what is okay, so in the afternoon, when students are in person, the question is, what is the instruction going to look like for students that are at home in distance learning? So as usual, they would be doing asynchronous instruction. And then as we continue to develop and refine the model, we want to add more small group instruction opportunities. And that is what we are looking at with the staffing that we have available. As we complete more of our labor agreements and reach those agreements, we're able to look at the entire staff that was usually on the campus and utilize more of those staff members to offer some of the support. So perhaps you can still do the small group instruction through a support staff person. But most of the time it would be for asynchronous instruction in the afternoon.
Okay. There are a couple questions about IEPs for students with special needs. So we also have our Executive Director of Special Education here, Jennifer Blake. So perhaps these will be for you or Sandra, Ms. Aguilera. So the questions are, what are the supports? How will students continue to get supports with their IEPs given this hybrid schedule? And then is there any preparation if a substitute will be doing the accommodations? How will substitutes be prepared to deliver those supports?
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for those questions. As it pertains to the first question, in terms of, or the second question I'll start with rather, in terms of substitutes, we will be making sure that substitutes have copies of the IEPs at a glance for the students who will be participating in their group, as well as making sure that they have lesson plans that are provided by the teacher. Our teachers who are unable to return in person will continue to provide distance learning support and will also continue to lead the instruction of the group in accordance with students' IEPs, thereby being able to provide direction to the support staff and to the teacher. And Jody, if you could remind me of the first question again, was it just around how services will be provided? Great.
Yes.
So in terms of how services will be provided during this time, we do have students who are participating in specialized programming for 50% or more of their day that will be returning to a school day that is almost a full school day, 4 days per week, with 1 day per week dedicated to distance learning instruction exclusively. For students who are in resource or inclusion-based programming or who have related services such as speech, we will be working with our providers to build schedules that are hybrid schedules. This will mean that they will have the maximum amount of in-person instruction possible using the small cohorts that are stable. And some students will continue to receive service in distance learning via virtual modality as well. But all of our related service personnel will be returning at the same timeline that was just shared in the presentation, and we'll begin working with students in small groups in person at that time as well.
Great, thank you. I'm going to take one more question that's a theme I'm seeing in the Q&A, and then I'll go to some of the hands raised. So this question is about when will families know about whether or not their teacher has opted in for that initial phase? And then I'm going to link it to another question that's somewhat related, but don't worry, I'll remind folks who are answering the questions. Will families have the option to change their choice, either to choose into in-person or to choose out of in-person at any time? So two questions.
So I can begin to answer that question. So Ms. Gard did share that Thursday is our date where we will share that information about in-person instruction at school sites. And so that's where families will receive the most information about who is returning and who is not returning and what will happen next. So we plan to have that ready for Thursday. We are still working through some of the details with our principals and the area superintendents are going site by site to do that planning, and we're almost done. So that's why we were saying we'll be done with that by Thursday. There has been some confusion. We can make sure that principals hear this message as well. We've had, many Friday morning meetings around these different topics, but the details, there's so many that we just want to make sure that everybody is clear on this option around, I said this on my survey, but I want to change my mind, and that is okay. You can definitely choose to opt in to in-person instruction if you chose distance learning. You can make that change. The biggest thing that we are stressing, and the reason why after the first week we wouldn't accept any more students, is because of the cohort. We have to make sure that there's not a lot of intermixing during the cohort or in the cohort, because that's where we want to just avoid students coming in and out because of the safety procedures that we know will help mitigate the spread of coronavirus. So that is why we are going to be strict about, once you make a decision on March 30th, you will stay in. Of course, if you decide you don't want to participate, you can always exit, but we will not be able to take more families in after that first week. And then that will be stable until April 19th, which is another avenue for people to enter and opt in for distance learning. And again, we would keep it stable. And I think Salja will go through those cohort details more in depth when we get into the safety section. But it is possible. If you're having trouble with that, you can reach out to myself. We have many avenues for you to give us that feedback and ask these questions. And we're willing to help that out at your school site if it's not clear how to make sure that you change your option to come back in, or if you want to come in for in-person learning, but you previously said no, you did not want to participate in in-person learning.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's take a few questions from the people who have their hands raised, and then we'll move to the second portion of our meeting. So Delia Araujo, you should be able to unmute yourself now and share your comment or question. Delia, are you there? Can you unmute yourself? There you go. We can hear you. Do you have a question or comment? Okay, we'll come back to you. Let's
No,
go.
está bien. Gracias.
Okay, yes. Go ahead, you can ask your question. ¿Quieres hacer una pregunta?
¿Tiene una pregunta para nosotros?
Sí, buenas noches.
Estamos aquí para ayudarle, señores, si tiene una pregunta.
Sí, ¿me escucha? Oh, sí, me escucha, sí. Mi pregunta es, entonces no van a ir diario a la escuela, nada más hay cierto día.
So the question is, should I do the translation or should I not? Okay.
I can do the translation. This is Rebecca
Okay.
Walker.
Okay.
So my question is, are they going to go every day to school or only certain days?
Right, I get confused when I'm
Oh, it went to mute, Ms. Aguilera. Oh. Does that work? Can you unmute yourself? I can't. Oh, okay. Okay. Let me see if I can work that out.
there we go. I think
There
okay.
it is. Good.
Sorry, I was saying that I was translating again in my head, so I'm sorry about that. If you are in, if you chose in-person instruction, you would be assigned to either a group A or a group B. So it depends site by site how many students are saying they want to come to in-person instruction. We have seen it where a full school, a full classroom wants to come back for in-person instruction. So it would be half of the class in group A and half of the class in group B. And then if it's an A-B rotation, the child would come to school twice in that week. Now, I have seen, and we've been working with principals, I have seen that the in-person demand of the people that want to be in person is a smaller number. So it is possible that a classroom could be most of the week in person for that block of time. So it will vary depending on the demand at your school site of how much time is allocated, how many students wanted the option for in-person instruction. Where we can, it could be all week, but when there's more demand, it will be more of that A/B rotation.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna take one more question and then I'll come back to all of you who have your hands up, keep them raised, but I wanna get you the safety information too. So right now, Stephen Valadez should be able to unmute yourself.
Oh my gosh, I didn't realize that I had raised my hand. I'm sorry.
No problem, that happens.
I do guess I have one question. I know that we're doing our best with vaccines. What can we tell families or teachers who live with people who are not really on the high priority list for vaccination? Is there, I know there's probably not very much that anybody can do to actually make that happen, but what are just some things that you guys could let us know to make us feel better about that?
Okay, and we are moving into, so the question is about just vaccines and who has access. I believe, Selja, can you address that question when we get to the safety, the slide? We have a slide on vaccines, so kind of come back to that, just make how to help families feel comfortable with who's getting vaccines and what we know about the pace of that. So I'm gonna allow, just because that quick one, Kelly to ask one more question, and then we'll go to the safety and I'll come back to those who have their raise. So Kelly, you should be able to unmute yourself. Kelly, are you there? Can you click unmute? Okay. Let's just go to one more. Ruchi, can you ask your question? Okay, I think some people may not have been aware. Ruchi, are you still there? Do you want to ask your question or share your comment? Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and
So was not planning on.
oh, there you are. Great, we can hear you.
Oh no, I was just saying I did not raise my hand intentionally, so you should move on to somebody else.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and give you the rest of the information, everyone. So we're going to go back to the presentation. Those who still have your hands raised, you can keep them raised, or you might want to double check and see on your picture if you have a hand raised, to make sure, since there's several of you who accidentally raised, you can lower that if you don't want to ask a question, but we'll come back to you after we share our safety portion of the evening. So with that, I'm going to introduce Salja Suresh, our Strategic Projects Director for COVID. Salja?
Thanks so much, Jody. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here after a very long day in what is a very long year. I appreciate you being here and speaking up and just really participating in this process. I'm going to go over the safety plans that we have in place here in OUSD. I'm going to go relatively quickly through the slides so that we have more time for Q&A and talk a little bit throughout this time period about the shifting guidance from the state and the county as well. So this is some guidance from the state and the county. So this is guidance that I'm sure many of you are already familiar with, of the 4 colored tiers that describe where we are as a county in terms of COVID spread, and that has guidance around what is allowable. So we are currently in red. Trends look good. We are, doing well currently with decreasing COVID in our community, getting vaccinated. So there is a good possibility that we might be moving into orange relatively soon. And so the state has a series of guiding documents for schools that are reopening, and the county also has a set of guiding documents for schools that are reopening. And so I know that many of you in the chat have raised the issue of the CDC changing their guidance recently from 6 feet to 3 feet for social distancing. That usually takes some time to then filter to states and then to counties. Our county today updated their guidance to change from 6 feet to 3 feet. For right now, all of our schools are still operating and planning for the 4 to 6 feet distance because that is what has been the guidance up until today for Alameda County schools. And that doesn't mean that it will change again in the future. All of these guidelines are likely to change and to be updated in the future by the county, by the state, by the CDC, and by local jurisdictions as well. So that guidance will also potentially change in the future, but as of today, we're still following the guidance that has been what Alameda County has been recommending, which is 4 to 6 feet. So that is how our classrooms are being set up and what we are thinking about at least for next week. Next slide, please. So just kind of high-level overview of the model that we've been following. A lot of folks have been talking about this in the public health sector. Our doctors from UCSF that have been working with us describe just, the various mitigation efforts that we have in place in schools to prevent the transmission of COVID in our schools. Is a little bit like multiple layers of Swiss cheese, right? That any one of these layers individually isn't sufficient, but when you put them all together, they're actually quite a strong barrier in preventing transmission. And that really begins at home, right? It really begins with making sure that students and staff do not come to school if they are feeling symptoms that might be related to COVID, if they've had an exposure to COVID, obviously if they are COVID positive. And then all of the things that we'd be expecting at school, like masks and like improved ventilation and like physical distancing, are all of the multiple things that we would have in place within the school building in order to reduce the risk of transmission once students actually do arrive. Next slide. Next slide, Jody. Thank you. Many of you have probably seen some of our progress around how we have been preparing for reopening in terms of our facility readiness. So we've had a public dashboard open for a little while. This reflects the work of hundreds of individuals across our school sites and our central offices in terms of preparing our schools to reopen. So that readiness dashboard is updated on a regular basis, and you can go to your individual school site and see, have my rooms been set up? Have the air purifiers been placed? Have the stickers gone up, and have the filters gotten upgraded? So you can sort of see about 15 or 16 different metrics for each individual school site and see the state of readiness there. Simultaneously, this week we began a series of walkthroughs where we're actually walking every single site with an operations team of a custodial supervisor, a technology services representative, a nutrition services representative, and then a lead person from the operations team to go through a pretty comprehensive checklist for site readiness with the site principal and the site custodian. So we walk the site, we look at the entrances, the classrooms, the nutrition service readiness, the custodial schedule, the restrooms, just to identify what are the things that need to happen between now and reopening, as well as to just certify, is this campus ready, or what are the remaining things? And then we have a truck with additional PPE that's making runs to the warehouse back and forth to schools every single day, so that if they're missing one or more items, we can get that taken care of on that very day. Next slide. So as I was mentioning on the Swiss cheese slide of sort of whose responsibility is it to make things safe, right? And really this is an ecosystem, right, that we are in a district where there are multiple individuals at the school site, at home, at central offices, that everyone has a part to play in making sure that our students are safe and that our schools are safe. At campuses, we have individuals who are directly responsible for making sure that there's PPE on hand and making sure that people are doing their symptom screening, making sure that there's that the safety procedures are being followed. Similarly, there are folks in the central office whose job it also is to do regular walkthroughs to make sure that things are happening in accordance to our guidelines, to make sure that people are following the procedures, that we're keeping enough PPE on hand, and that the school is getting the support that they need in following all of these new rules and regulations that are new to everyone. And of course, we have to be in partnership with our students and our families, again, to make sure that the following of these guidelines, the teaching of these guidelines is being reinforced at home as well as at school. Next slide. Jody, next slide, please.
I believe I clicked on it. I'm not sure if you can see.
Oh, yeah, it's coming. Thank you. Okay, so the next section that I'm going to be going through is the daily symptom screener and the safe coverings. So if we go to the next slide. So everyone, staff and students alike, will be required to do a daily symptom screener before they arrive to school. This is a requirement by the county and obviously also good practice, that we want to make sure that anyone who is feeling ill in any way, who has any symptoms that might be related to COVID, are staying home. So this is a QR code to an app called ParentSquare that will allow parents to log in and log in their health screening information for their children before students arrive. So that upon entry to the school, if you've done the screen, you can go ahead and show the all clear and enter the building. And if you haven't done the screen, then there will be someone there to ask the questions of you, of the student upon entry. And then of course, masks, next slide. We will have masks on hand at school for anyone who forgot theirs, or it gets dirty at school and they need a replacement. We have child-size masks as well as adult-size masks. But we ask that children and staff come to school wearing a mask, as is the guidance across the county, in either 2-ply cloth or 3-ply surgical masks, and that we make sure that it has a good fit so that it's not falling down and slipping down over the nose. Next slide. There are a few mask exemptions as defined by the state. So if there are medical needs or specific needs related to a child's individual disability, there may be an exception that is granted for the mask, and that is something that would need to be referred to health services to make the determination and allow the mask exemption. Next slide. So right now there's PPE at every school site, in addition to the general just boxes of gloves and boxes of masks and gallons of hand sanitizer. There's also just an individual kit for every single teacher that includes face shields, masks, hand sanitizer, disinfectant, and paper towels, so that they have their own little kit that they can keep with them in the classroom, which of course can be continually reordered from the warehouse as needed. Next slide. And so, of course, for the last couple of weeks, schools have been really gearing up to get their campuses ready. Everyone's really excited to see the kids back. And so let's talk a little bit about what that campus setup looks like. So on this next slide, you'll see sort of what it looks like when you might arrive to your school. You might come in the school through a different entrance than you're normally used to coming into. I was doing a walkthrough at a site today, and we were identifying about 4 different locations where different grades might enter, so that the students, A, don't have to stand in long lines to do the symptom screening, and B, to reduce the possibility of students intermingling in different cohorts. So that is some of the work that's happening at school sites right now, to think through which are the different entrances that need to be used and for which students, and how do we make sure that they're each set up appropriately with hand sanitizer and signage and all of the things that need to happen for the students to have a safe entry to campus. And one thing I will also just point out is that we would be asking families who are coming, particularly with the little kids, to come up to the entrance to make sure that they are checked in and all clear with the symptom screener before dropping them off, as opposed to coming on campus. We're trying to limit the number of people on campus, again, to just ensure fewer people, greater stability of cohorts, and less intermingling and potential transmission of anything. Next slide. So at each entrance, there will be an individual who is doing that screening. If families have done the screening ahead of time in ParentSquare, they'll be able to just show that screening and come in. And if they haven't, they would be asked the questions at the entrance. Next slide. So we have these stickers that are that have been put up at schools, on walls, on doors, on floors. They're adhesive, and so they're available for teachers as well to use in the classroom as teachers are coming back to set up their classrooms in the next few days. Next slide. As we're walking the sites this week, we're also taking a look at classroom setup and looking at how far are the seats, and let's go ahead and measure it. And how many students are you expecting to have back in this classroom? And so how far do they need to be sitting from each other? Are you going to be using a rug for rug time? If so, how can we use masking tape to indicate where students might be sitting. Are there shared tables where students might have to sit closer than 6 feet to each other? And do we need plexiglass? And if so, how much do we need? And let's get it from the warehouse right now. So those are some of the questions that we are walking through with principals and safety leads to make sure that we're addressing that right now. Next slide. I know that ventilation has been a really hot topic this whole year, and it's certainly one of the most critical safety measures when it comes to preventing transmission of an airborne disease. So we have purchased 2 air purifiers for each classroom. That's one of the other things that we're just laying eyes on and checking for the walkthroughs to make sure that those 2 air purifiers are present, in addition to the HVAC filters that have also been upgraded in the schools that have HVAC. Next slide. In addition, the guidance from the state and the county is that, shared play areas, shared materials, shared PPE equipment, that is allowable. And the recommendation is that students use hand sanitizer before and after. So we will have hand sanitizer everywhere, hand sanitizer at the entrance to the school, hand sanitizer at the entrance to each classroom, so that hand washing and hand sanitizing is part of the new normal, that is something that students would be doing multiple times in a day. Next slide. So in terms of meal times and meal areas, obviously we are starting our return to hybrid with afternoon sections primarily. And so we're focusing on continuing our home delivery service for families who need that and making sure that we're not interrupting that service. And then also providing a super snack, so sort of a larger snack than just like a bag of goldfish, but a more significant snack to all students who need it in like a grab and go format so that they're able to take it and have it off campus. And for students who are on campus because they're in an SBC program or that they are in one of our hubs, they will have lunch provided and generally are eating outside as much as possible socially distanced. Next slide. Next slide, Jody.
On my side, I clicked, there might be a little bit of delay. It's on isolation wellness.
Okay, thank you. Great. One of the other questions on the walkthrough checklist is also just making sure that each site has an isolation or a wellness space set up. So in case there is a student who is not feeling well during the school day, that they've got somewhere safe to go and wait while they get a parent or a family member to come pick them up. Next slide. So all of our custodial staff members have been trained on the use of an electrostatic sprayer. Those are on campuses right now. That's one of the things that we check on during the walkthroughs, in addition to the cleaning schedule. So we walk the campus, we identify which are the rooms that are going to be used, what are the high-touch surfaces, do we have the new cleaning schedules posted, and we are walking the campus with the custodian to make sure that we're addressing any issues up ahead of time instead of having them come up after school has been open. So we have that conversation so that everyone is clear on the duties and the expectations. Next slide. So I know that there are a lot of questions that have been coming up around vaccines as well as contact tracing, so I will try and address those questions here. Next slide. So for vaccines, we've been very lucky and grateful here in Alameda County to have had a relatively smooth rollout of the vaccine for phase 1B. So at this point, all of our staff who want the vaccine have access to it, and our talent department has stepped up to support any individuals who've had trouble finding an appointment to be able to get the appointment and get their vaccine. And in terms of students, the Pfizer vaccine is approved for use in individuals 16 and over, although younger individuals are not yet prioritized for the vaccine. It is at least has been approved for them. We are currently not requiring vaccines. It is one of the safety measures that would be in place, but it is not required for all staff as per the state and the county guidelines, as it is not something that would be required for schools to reopen. As we know, schools have reopened around the country, really all year, even before vaccines were available. Next slide. We are also working on expanding our COVID testing program. So we began COVID testing for staff in our hub back in November. We are continuing to offer testing at regional hub sites. We have about 5 testing locations around the city. We are starting to do testing with students this week at some of our hub sites. And we're hoping to release a list at the end of this week of all the testing locations that will be available for staff as well as students as well as family members who might want to get tested. Next slide. So contact tracing, our health services department and our talent department have really stepped up to learn how to be contact tracers this year. As we knew very early in the pandemic that this was something that, there was not necessarily a system set up in Alameda County to support an organization as large as ours. So essentially what would happen is if there is someone who tests positive for COVID, either a student or a staff member who is in a particular cohort, that cohort would be directed to quarantine, and the appropriate talent person or health services person who would be the case manager for this case would be in contact tracing, right? And so to find out, not just in terms of the cohort, in terms of anyone else who that person might have been in close contact with, which means closer than 6 feet for longer than 15 minutes. And then would identify those close cohorts, those close contacts, and ask them to quarantine as well. In the case of someone having symptoms or someone who had exposure outside of the home, those individuals are also advised to stay home and to isolate. Currently, that period is 10 days for all of these things. If there's a positive case, if there's an exposure, if there's symptoms. And this guidance, again, is one of those areas that has changed over the last year, and we can anticipate it changing again. But if there is a case, principals are asked to report it to talent or to health services. The contact tracer follows up on it and then is in communication with the individual as well as all of the close contacts to tell them what are the next steps and how many days a quarantine might need to be issued for. Next slide. Great. So we will pause there and I'll let Jody pull up some questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Salaja. So a couple of questions about symptoms. So given this time of year when there's a lot of allergies, how will staff or how are we be tracking symptoms for illness versus allergy? And then if I could just tack on that, will staff, in addition to students, be having the symptom checker before they enter campus?
Yes. So so staff and students will need to do their symptom screen before they come to campus each day. And in terms of like allergies versus COVID symptoms, I have a young son, he's going back to school soon, he has terrible allergies. And the question from the county is phrased as, are these new or different symptoms? So these are not symptoms that you live with on a daily basis. A medical note, something that says that like this is not COVID related, this child has allergies, is something that then will help the school differentiate between whether this is COVID or whether this is just another symptom that is unrelated to COVID.
Okay, and then also one more, and I don't know if this is you, Salja, or if this is you, Ms. Blake, but a question of students who have IEPs and are taking transportation to school, so they don't have their parents or guardian dropping them off to fill out the tracker. How will they be doing their symptoms tracker or screening before entering the campus?
I'm happy to speak to the transportation part, and then maybe Salaja, you can address the symptom screen for school. Our transportation vendor has a symptom check that will be a part of every family's daily routine on special education transportation for every child that has it indicated in their IEP as a related service. It is a online form that asks the exact same questions as the form that will be asked for all students when they when they arrive at school. And that form will be every day in advance of the ride. Students who have the questions indicated as yes for any symptomology or exposure to COVID-19 will not be picked up on the route for that day. In addition to that, the buses are taking other safety precautions, such as ensuring the buses are ventilated, working at reduced capacity, having masks on for students and driver, of course, and making sure that we have students on assigned seats that allow for distancing.
Okay, thank you. Couple questions about vaccines. One, can you clarify who is able to get vaccines, if it's just teachers or if custodians or other staff on campus are able to get vaccines as well? And then secondly, is there ever going to be information for families about how many people on a campus, how many staff have gotten their vaccines, or is that HR, like personnel info we can't share?
Yeah, so I can answer the first question, and I'm happy to try to answer the second and defer to Tara as well in talent. So the first question is that yes, if you are a custodian, if you're a principal, if you're a health professional, whatever role you play within the ecosystem of the school, you are eligible for the vaccine. So we have been trying to help all of the individuals, all of our staff members get access to the vaccine. And then to the second question, that is protected health information. That isn't anything that we would be releasing. But Tara, is there anything else you want to add about that?
No, you got them both correct. We won't be releasing that information.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I'll pull a couple more questions from the Q&A, and then I'll go to some live questions and then back to the Q&A with our time we have left. I know you shared, Selja, a lot about different people on staff and different ways that we are going to be monitoring the safety protocols. Can you talk about what support teachers will have in ensuring the 3 feet apart or ensuring the social distance in the classroom?
Yeah. I mean, really, that's one of the things that we're looking up in terms of the physical layout of the classroom to make sure that, like, physically the furniture is set to be 6 feet apart. And then that's also part of the reason why we are doing the hybrid schedule of the A's and the B's, is so that is reducing the number of students who are in person any given day, as opposed to all 20 or 30 students in at one time, where it would be a much greater challenge to maintain the distancing in that case.
Okay. And the next one are about the filters. Have the filters in the HVAC systems been replaced, or can we share a little bit more about how the air purifiers and filters have been checked at the sites?
Yeah. So one of the first things that we did over the fall was just an assessment of what kinds of systems we had. And in the HVAC systems that were forced air systems, we replaced all of those filters with MERV 16 filters. And so that was kind of a first layer of protection. And then the second layer of protection was making sure that we had the in-room HEPA air purifiers. So those are the ones that have been getting shipped out to schools over the past couple of months, where we're working to make sure that we have 2 of those in each of the classrooms.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to go to a few, some of the raised hands, and then I'll come back to the Q&A. I'll keep tracking to see some common questions coming up in the Q&A, so you can continue to put questions there. Okay, let's go to Annie G. Should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, I have both a comment first and then a question. My comment is that the last results that I saw from the family survey were that over half of the families stated that they wanted to go back in person. 38% of the families said they wanted to stay distance learning, and then 8% didn't respond. And so my comment is simply that it's extremely disappointing to see that there is such a significant percentage of the teaching time continuing as distance learning versus in-person learning, when the majority of the folks in the district, families in the district, asked to go back to in-person. So that's just my comment. My question is this. I have a kindergartner who's never gone to school before. I can only assume that the reason that TK through second grade was prioritized to go back first is that they have probably the biggest challenge learning over Zoom for many reasons. So they were prioritized to go back, and then teachers weren't required to go back at the same time. And now we have this, what seems like a looming problem of, you know, kindergartners and first grade kids and TK kids who are going to be sent back to a substitute teacher, which is a really bad experience for a little kid. And so I guess why in the bargaining process did you all not require the teachers to come back if you were prioritizing these kids to come back first?
I can answer that, and that is a great question. Thank you for asking that question. So we understand that is, you're right, a difficult situation. We really wanted to phase in and start the launch of reopening, and as you can imagine, it took a lot, and it's taken a lot for us to get to that point. And one of the things that has been raised as we just discussed with our labor partners is the ability for some agency and choice for teachers to be able to get their feet wet and get started. So while we could have just launched school on April 19th district-wide and just started there was a really big push to allow for groups to start early, to get started optionally. So it's a 2-week period, 1 week before spring break and 1 week after, and then all teachers will return. And we will be providing more information about the specifics at each school site. If there isn't enough opt-ins, what will be the scenarios there, and perhaps that will better inform planning and help with conversations with families around that. So thank you for that question.
Thank you, Janine, and thank you, Annie G. Next person to speak is Monica. Monica, you should be able to unmute yourself. Give you a moment to find the unmute button, Monica. Okay, we'll come back to you. Let's go to Olivia Romulus Park. Olivia, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah.
There you go.
My question is, would all the high school kids turn out back on the 19th? Because I'm not feeling comfortable for my son to be back in school until I know it is safe for him.
Okay, thank you for that. I think your question is, will high school students be asked to go back in person because you're feeling unsafe for him to go back?
Yeah. Okay. He go to Oakland,
So currently for all students at all grade levels, they have the choice to stay in distance learning. And so that is true of high school students as well. Where right now, the high school students that are being invited back are the students who are in the high priority groups as defined by the state. So our English learners, some students with disabilities, as well as students who do not have that technology or who have been disengaged. So those are the students who are getting the invitation to come back now. But again, everyone has a choice to stay in distance learning for the remainder of the year.
Thank you. Next question is Sue Getcherer.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, because there's not the usual mute button on this display. I wanted to know about the buses. I filled out all the different applications, including the one for the bus. And then when I found out what the schedule would be, we're not going to do it because he also goes to Head Start and he gets a lot more in-person time there. But I haven't heard from the bus company. So do I need to go ahead and cancel that or wait until they contact me?
Thank you for that question, Sue. Our transportation personnel will be individually calling every family over the coming days who has transportation as a related service in their IEP to confirm whether or not the family would like to avail themselves of that service. So you should expect a phone call regarding your child's transportation service that would either route it, or if you do not wish to have it, we would not route it.
Thank you. And before I go to Rosalba, I'm just seeing a couple questions that seem to be related, which are, will adults or parents be allowed on campus? And if parents want to volunteer to help the school, is that discouraged? So it's kind of a similar question about how can parents be on campus, either for drop off or volunteering, or is that not a possibility right now?
Yeah, so in terms of drop off and pickup, we are asking that parents stay at the entrance of the school as opposed to coming on school grounds to reduce the number of just humans that we have on campus. So that we are trying to keep it as safe as possible in terms of the cohorts of students and staff who are present. To get cleared as an in-person volunteer, you would be going through the Oakland Public Education Fund, who has been a longtime partner of ours, and they do normally provide us with volunteers this year, mostly online, but they have approved a training and a waiver process for in-person volunteering. So if that is something that you're interested in doing, I would start with the Ed Fund.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to Rosalba Tapia. Should be able to unmute yourself. Rosalba Tapia, if you can click on your mic.
Sí, hola, buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Yo tengo un comentario más que nada. Yo tengo un hijo que está estudiando ahorita el 11 grado en Oakland High. Él es estudiante de Ieps. Y yo estoy resuelta, y mi familia también, a mandarlo hasta el próximo año escolar a la escuela, porque no me siento cómoda en mandarlo en estas circunstancias. Y aparte, que no estoy con confianza de cómo me lo van a tratar en la escuela por medio de la pandemia. No sé si están preparados realmente ustedes para asumir esta situación, ya que sabemos que los estudiantes no pueden estar lejos uno del otro menos de 1 metro, si son amigos. Entonces yo apoyo a los maestros totalmente y al 100% que deberían de regresar hasta el próximo año escolar, porque los maestros son los que han dado la cara por ustedes, son los que están en la cámara al otro lado día tras día apoyando a nuestros estudiantes por medio con su paciencia, su entusiasmo y su dedicación. No ustedes, los maestros son los que tienen todo el derecho de votar cuando van a regresar a la escuela. Es todo lo que quiero decir.
Thank you, Rosalba. Can we get an interpretation for the comment?
Sure, absolutely, I'm ready. So it's more a comment than a question. And I have a student in Oakland High in 11th grade, and he has an IEP. And I want to say that I feel very strongly that students should go back to school next school year, because I don't feel that under these circumstances, I don't trust that he's going to be safe at school. And I don't know if you're really, truly prepared for this. Like, for example, they have to be 1 meter apart, and I don't know if you can do that. So I support 100% the teachers that you should reopen schools next school year, because they are the ones that they are giving their face. They are the ones that are doing all this work, and they are behind the screen, not you. So I completely support the teachers to reopen next school year.
Thank you, Rosalba. The next attendee is Ashley Guido.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I actually kind of have 3 questions. I'm hoping that they'll be quick. For the first one would be for like parents with work schedules that won't work for the in-class learning. will that be likely to change this year, or do you think that probably won't happen until next year? And I'll just keep my kids in distant learning full time. The second one will be for schools that have like very limited parking or no parking, as our schools do. Will there be a drive up, drop off option like they normally have, or is that not an option currently, which I completely understand if so. And then another one will be if they are required to quarantine, will that be counted as like a missed day of school, or will they kind of just be grouped in with the strictly distant learning group? And will the teachers kind of let us know where to go from there?
Mhm. Yeah, I'm happy to answer the last two questions and would defer to Sandra around the scheduling question. So for the drop-off area, that's kind of one of the purposes of doing these walkthroughs this week, is to figure out how exactly we want the entrances to work, because every campus is just so different. So I know in some of the hubs that have been running, they still do like a rolling drop-off, and they ask the parent to just like show the clearance on their phone of like, hey, I did the symptom screen, the kid's good, am I good? And they just like do a little hand symbol, and then they drop the student off. And so I think the sort of physicality of what the entrance looks like is going to vary just campus by campus based on how many students they have, and like you said, the parking. And then the second question, or rather the third question that you had, was around the quarantine period. So, you know, distance learning is still happening, right? And it's still, for many students, the kind of base model of instruction. And so if a cohort is ordered to go into quarantine, distance learning would be then the default for that 10-day period, so that students aren't completely missing out on instruction during that time period.
Okay, and Selja, can you repeat the question for Sandra to the one about the schedules?
Yeah, I think it was a question just around, you know, parents managing their work schedules. And, you know, right now the schedule is a couple of hours in the afternoon, and just sort of forward thinking and support for parents in figuring out how to plan for the rest of the year if that schedule is likely to move or not.
So we're treating the March 30th and April 19th as starting points. And we do understand that the schedule is not ideal for our working families. We do want to work with each school site to expand more in-person and potentially all-day sessions, but we do need to get started to see how our implementation goes. And then from there, we can work on expanding. Each site will be different, but we do aim to offer more in person than the time that's being offered right now. But we do need to see how our in-person implementation goes, and how we can build from there. So not ideal for all families right now in this situation. We do want to expand, but we do need to work with our school sites and with our families and teachers to make those options available. It is possible that we can also expand for more of our hub settings. And so that is what we'll be working with our school sites to identify where more expansion can happen. So not exactly where we all want it to be right now, but we want to get started and see where we can grow from there.
Okay, thank you. And unfortunately, we are at time. I am going to take one more speaker, and those who have your hands raised, if you can continue to type in the Q&A, your questions or comments that you weren't able to share in this meeting. We are going to save all of the Q&A, and we do have this recorded so that we can share with other families. And then all the questions that we weren't able to answer, we're going to save and continue to inform our future communications with families and our future planning. So Mona, we'll go ahead. You'll be the last speaker. Mona, can you get on? Oh, yeah, I think you got it. Mona, do you have a question or a comment? See that you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. give you one moment. Mona, are you there? Okay, Mona, I'm going to go to Gloria and we'll come back to see if your speaker comes back. So we'll allow this last two. So Gloria Gaines. Gloria, can you unmute yourself?
I apologize. I didn't mean to have my hand up.
Okay. So getting to a few more people on the list. So the next speaker is, I just see AB. Can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
So if families want to modify their in-person schedule days, can they do that? For example, if the regular in-person schedule for their children is 4 days a week, how can they modify that? And lastly, if a student opted out in-person learning and his or her teacher is teaching in person, how will their students in distance learning be in school, or how will they be learning with their teacher, not in distance learning?
So in terms of changing your selection, you can change your selection with your school site. So if you opted in for in-person instruction, you can change it to distance learning, and vice versa. You can change it if you opted for distance learning and would like in person. So that's I think that's the first question that you asked. And then the second question is, what does the schedule look like for students that are either in person or in distance learning? So the schedules are posted. If you opted for in person and you are in a group that's either A or B, you would be going to in person twice a week. That's more or less where our schedules have landed. The morning block is what's called Synchronous Instruction, and that's done through Zoom. If you are not in a group that's in person, you would be in asynchronous or assigned work by the teacher. You wouldn't be in person or on the computer through Zoom when we start the in-person instruction.
Okay, thank you. So again, we are out of time. We are going to post this presentation that I'm seeing, rereading some of the questions you have there. There is information in the presentation. If you logged on a little bit later, you can access the presentation. We'll put it in the chat one more time. Mark, if you can do that, and we'll also have it up on our website. We'll have a recording of this meeting that you can come back to. And as I said before, we are going to save the Q&A. So if you didn't have your question answered and you didn't get a chance to write it in the Q&A, if you can do that before you log off, so we can make sure we've captured all the questions. So I will pass it to our board directors and superintendents if anybody wants to make any closing thoughts.
I'll defer to our board member Thompson. Thank you for joining, and we'll allow him to make closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. I really appreciate this session this evening, and I appreciate the hard work of our staff and our board members, everyone working together to make sure that we have a safe plan for kids to come back to school. I love the fact that we're offering options of either in person or online so that we are meeting the needs of all of our parents. I just want to say that I think it's so important for us to be aware of what's going on. And as was said, and as is the case, we have moved from the purple to the red tier, and hopefully with our fingers crossed, we'll go to the orange tier and then down to the yellow tier. So I want everyone to remember that it's so important for us to continue to wear masks and continue to make sure that we are socially distanced so that we can make certain that we can put to rest this virus, because we want to get back to as much as normalcy as possible. And so with all of the work and the continued work of everyone, we'll certainly get there. And so I want to thank all of the parents for coming out this evening. I know you had a hard day at work, but you came out and you voiced your concerns. And I hope the things that you've heard really are going to help you make the proper decision. And I want to invite you to continue to contact our school district because people really want to talk to you and help to allay any of the concerns that you might have. But have a great evening and thank you very much. And so I'll pass it back to Ms. Talkington.
Okay, with that, we will officially close our meeting. Thank you, everyone.